thank you very much for the opportunity of being here and for being here tonight. Thanks for the wake-up call with that glass. It gave us all a good adrenaline rush. And I also wanted to just give a mention to my co-founder of Liquid Comics, Suresh Sitharaman, who's there tonight in the audience as well. But we truly do have an amazing group of people here. And one of the things we're going to try and discuss tonight is what is the future of storytelling? And is the future the same as the past? The two macro trends we see in the world today that are disrupting media as we know it seem to be happening at the same time, which is technology and globalization. And either one of them would have changed, in my mind, the very nature of the way we embrace media today, but the fact that both are happening together, I think, really forces us to rethink what we know. We have some master storytellers here with us today. Andy Breckman, I will allow each of them to, of course, give a few words and introduce themselves and give you their stories, but Andy Breckman was the creator behind one of the most critically acclaimed television shows in the world, Monk, and really a show that defined, I think, a new type of procedural in America and set the bar for many other shows that have followed since. Jim Manos has been really he's an Emmy Award-winning writer and executive producer and creator, has been behind some of the most acclaimed shows on television and some of the biggest dramas, whether it be Dexter, The Shield, and Sopranos. And Gerard Boccaccio is not only a professor at NYU Tisch, he's a producer and has really led the charge as an executive when he was working previously at FX at ushering in a whole new era of television shows that have been long-lasting. And so with that, I'd love for you guys just to open up with a few words, just kind of what is the future of storytelling, if I had to throw that question out, and what you would respond to. And any one of you, Andy?
Oh, Lord. What is the future of storytelling? Well, I hope for my sake and my children's sake that the basic elements of storytelling are not going to shift too dramatically, too quickly, because I'm basically a storyteller and an old school storyteller, and I'm playing. I feel like I'm in some ways, like maybe a lot of us, I'm playing catch up with the new equation in Hollywood and the new technologies. I go out there occasionally and pitch my wares and pitch ideas for shows and movies, and the pitches have changed slightly, but I think the bottom line is still, I hope it's still, if you have a story to tell that's compelling and dramatic and emotional, then there are people out there that want to hear it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
it does?
Well, I think
then I got
that
very
your premise is storytelling is fundamentally always going to remain the same truths.
Here's hoping.
Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't see how it could change. I mean, it's been going on since the Greeks when they invented basically the three-act structure. So I don't see how, the venue may change, whether it's all this technology shit I don't know anything about, but and they put stuff on it. But I think at the end of the day, if people are going to try to break the rules of the basic fundamental essence of telling a story, it won't work whether you put it on, an iPhone or an iPad or whatever they're doing these days. I just think it's going to be, you still need to put two people in a room and one wants something and the other one doesn't, and that always works. So I don't see really it kind of manifesting itself in any other way.
What do you think, Gerard?
Well, obviously, as the non-writer on the panel, I sort of come at this a little bit differently. I think that without storytellers, we are nothing. But I think you have to understand the fundamentals of good storytelling in order to break those rules. It's important to realize that at the end of the day, telling a story beginning, middle to end, creating compelling characters, and putting them in a backdrop that is appealing to an audience, not all audiences, and maybe that's a part of the new change, is really where you have to start. So what happens, though, as you start to endeavor in an idea is that you start to have to think about its myriad applications. You have to take into account second windowing in television. You have to take into account the new media and digital world of the internet. You have to take into account how content is consumed in 2012, which is very different from, frankly, 2000, 2005 even. And I think that at the end of the day, it all sort of dovetails into the concept of how money is spent and how money is recouped, and how ultimately money is made by those who are allowing men like this to create great television, great film. So I think you have to be a very multifaceted sort of individual these days, or have a really good partner Manos and I have worked on a lot of things together since we met on The Shield, and we have found that sort of balance. So I kind of do the business grunt work, and he does the creative grunt work. And I'm very happy to be there.
Can I speak to that? I think it's really important not to. I mean, Gerard is a brilliant guy, and unfortunately, he's my partner on virtually everything I do these days. But I don't think anybody who is creative should necessarily take into account all the different venues and all these different streams, or whatever they call them, all these different kind of applications that, you know, a story can now be told on. I think at the end of the day, I think, you know, somebody who's more savvy about that type of thing should be in control of how your story will be disseminated. And I think when people think that they can create something that will appeal to the whole world, or that they can do something that they think, you know, they understand the zeitgeist of the country, I think they're screwed. I think that's a big mistake. And I think the more specific any storyteller tells a story, the better chance of that story being told and being seen by people. Because the specificity is what draws people in. When you try to kind of appeal to every single demographic group, and, you know, this character's for the young girls, and this character's for the 18 to 24-year-old, you know, whatever, guys, it becomes a mishmash, you know? And I think the best way to really prove that is if you look at plays, dramatic plays, things that, you know, Eugene O'Neill wrote, or Tennessee Williams, or Arthur Miller, and we were talking about how we're just essentially salesmen, you know, running around trying to sell stories out of our suitcase. You know, those plays are so specific that you at first glance would say, well, I have nothing in common with Willy Loman. I have nothing in common with anybody from Long Day's Journey into the Night. They're so specific, but they're all about something bigger. You know, they're all about bigger issues. Yeah. So I think that's a big mistake that people make.
And what would you say to that, Andy? I mean, is it ultimately...
It has to be a universal theme, and you have to identify with all these characters. You know, the one thing that might have changed is, tell me if you guys agree, is the pressure, at least on me, is I'm feeling it, is to increase the pace of what I'm writing. You can't write quite as leisurely. Your storytelling can't be quite as leisurely as it was even 25, 30 years ago.
That's absolutely true.
You know, I think at the attention span, thanks in large part to, you know, these iPhones and iPads and YouTube and everyone just watching 6-minute clips of things. I think everyone's attention span is much shorter. You know, my little show Monk we did about 18 scenes in every hour, which was very, very slow, and it moved as like a glacier kind of pace. Most other shows were doing 18 little scenes. Probably every 20 minutes. Probably they were doing 3 times as many as our show. And I've been told that a show that leisurely and slow-paced probably wouldn't make it today.
But you bring up a great question, which is ultimately, I think that everyone hears this comment, that the attention span of kids today has changed, that the youth, that the world has changed, that they're in a movie, texting, tweeting, they're watching, they can't sit through a typical kind of slower-paced drama. But is it the attention spans have reduced, or their processing speed's gone up? You know, is the question really, do people see it coming a mile away now? Do they know the formulas, the devices? They're so inundated with content from so many different directions that to take them into a different direction, to throw them out of their comfort zone, to give them something that jolts them, requires, you know, they can see the kind of where it's going to, so they want to get there faster?
You mean
they've
seen it all 1,000 times?
Yeah,
To keep it fresh, you have to come at it from different angles.
Is it something to that extent so that they can't handle the pacing? Or on the flip side, is it all about now, you know, master execution? I mean, Monk was a masterfully executed show, but Avatar, we've all seen the story 1,000 times. I mean, it was the same story that was the, you know, Dances with Wolves in space, and it was kind of Pocahontas in space, and it was there, but the execution was flawless. So was it something that even though everyone knew where it was going...
Now, it's interesting. If Dances with Wolves was released 2 years ago, like, how would that have done? That was a 3-hour, very slow-paced Western without special effects or 3D. I don't know.
I'm at a disadvantage because I've got 2 writers here. So, but I would suggest that Dances with Wolves would be a successful movie today, creatively, as it was when it was released. Would it do the same kind of box office? I can't tell you that I know the answer to that, because it's a bunch of different calculations. But I'm a visiting arts professor at NYU at Tisch, and I work now with a lot of sophomores and juniors in school. And I'm blown away by the capacity to absorb ideas, information, content. By the way, I'm almost more blown away by the fact that they're passionate viewers. They are loyal. They watch everything. They just don't have any tolerance for false beats. They don't have any tolerance for storytelling that's not authentic. They don't have any tolerance for laziness. And I think that's the thing, particularly in the broadcast business, when you have to program a schedule top to bottom 7 days a week, you have to fill, and it's hard to find a Dexter or hard to find a Monk. And when you do, you build around it and off of it to try and draft on its success. And it breeds lazy television, lazy film. And I think that the audience now is uninterested, and they reject it more quickly than ever before. You know, when a show like Wings was on NBC, it was the quietest successful show anybody had ever seen. It was tucked into the 9:30 slot, and it just sort of happened because nobody really paid any attention to it. But that's when audiences stayed with the network. And they were there from 8 o'clock until 10 o'clock, or 11 o'clock when the 10 o'clock show ended. That is no longer the case. Whether it's your cloud or your DVR or wherever you're pushing your content, people are programming their own channels. And I think that is one of the biggest shifts in terms of the future of the business from the standpoint of those who will allow guys like this to make what they want to make.
Well, and then you asked the question if the economics ultimately dictate how the content is created. So, I mean, ultimately, is 44 minutes the right amount of content to create the type of dramas that you guys wanted to create? Or is it just something you were forced with? People said, look, you got 44 minutes of content and figure it out. You've got to create this many ad breaks, figure it out. You've got to, you know, ultimately, do creators have to be adaptable enough that they say, look, you know, they kind of fit the mold. If it's 6 minutes on a web series, if it's going to be 1 minute on short form, if it's going to be a 3-act structure, in film. I mean, ultimately, aren't you dictated somewhat by the constraints of the medium that you work with, and how does that play a role, you know?
Yeah, I'm a hired gun. If there are 5 commercial breaks, I'll write 5 commercial breaks. I'm not going to argue for more or less commercial breaks. I will say that I always was jealous of HBO, which they, you know, they had a full hour, and they even, I think, occasionally if the Sopranos needed 62 minutes one week, you grab series. I'm sorry. Is that wrong?
You couldn't go 59. You have to pay everybody double.
Oh,
HBO
then
was loath to have that happen.
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was, but.
Although we at FX would often go over the hour in order to hold the audience.
Right. The show would end at
Yeah,
8:01.
we calculated that the value of not going to the commercial pod on the hour break, where we would lose an audience, was not as valuable as keeping them, and we would pay that extra money to keep the audience entertained through the hour, so that when they finally did have a break, they were behind all the other shows that they might have left.
So did you pay for 2 extra minutes of content, or did you add 2 minutes of commercials, or what did you?
Oh, it was a different, there were different calculations, which is sort of uninteresting minutia. But I would suggest that we just valued that audience staying with the show and the channel.
Yeah, but it seems to me it's, you know, most content creators have to retrofit within a kind of paradigm that people have set for them in some ways. And, you know, ultimately, I think that's also, is it going to be affected more by globalization? Or if they said, you know, we're getting half our audience from China tomorrow, we need to get a couple of Chinese guys in the show? Or, you know, are you going to see more choices being dictated by both technology and globalization as people start looking at those things on television?
I haven't been in the movie business in 10 years, but I know that is what's driving the studios now, is they need international stars to sell these projects overseas, and the Chinese market is huge, and you probably have a hit just in China now, if I guess. I don't, you know.
Yeah, please.
But that's interesting to me, because globalization, I think the whole world is becoming more global. And I just came back from, I was in Europe for 2 weeks. I just came back Sunday, as a matter of fact. And it's very interesting, because I'm working on a show that is truly global, where everybody in the world, whether it be a Russian, an American, an Israeli, a Italian, a Frenchman, you know, they're all in this 1-hour series that I'm writing. And I think that's kind of cool in a lot of ways, because it does fit what I think is happening politically and economically. We're all tied to each other. I don't pretend to know anything about international co-productions or any of that nonsense. You know, that's not my bailiwick. But I think what's the whole thing about globalization is the universality of it. I think that's kind of an intriguing element for me. I think that how Americans run a show is very uniquely different than the way Europeans run a show. It's not necessarily on their end particularly, I think, how do I say this? It's not a particularly cost-effective way, the way that we do it.
Right.
So it was, I had a lot of people coming up to me asking me how we run a show and all, and it was, it's just a different kind of world. But I think what's important is that drama transcends borders. It's kind of like a melody and a harmony of music. That's why all writers want to be musicians, because, they always get the girls, but because their music kind of can cross borders. It's not like comedy, which doesn't necessarily cross the pond. But drama is drama, and it does cross borders, and I think if you can make it global, why not?
I mean, one of the things I think, as you alluded, I think in Hollywood, we're certainly seeing now this global tentpole direction, which is the Avengers spoke to that this weekend. It was around the world phenomenon that was there. Television has been unique, that you've seen both the exports, but you also see the remakes, right? So you see Ugly Betty become Ugly Woody. You see, kind of all of these various Office remakes around the world, and we haven't seen it so much in drama, as I think you allude to, and maybe we'd see it a lot in comedy remakes and those types of things. And maybe you're right. Do you think drama is more universal than comedy in terms of speaking to the core of humanity?
I do. I mean, I know a lot of Brits. They never laugh at what I say, so I think it's but they laugh here. So.
From the creator of Dexter.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to be careful about the word globalization, because I think it's sort of it's become the euphemism for a lot of things that it's not. I think a big shift is that there was a period of time from, 1970 to 1995, when the U.S. market could just push its content onto the world stage. And international networks, territories would have to just absorb it and accept it, because they didn't have the infrastructure to make their own programming. And they weren't confident that their own language programming was anything more than sort of local. And then that shifted, and it shifted for a lot of different reasons. A, they got sick of bad television movies, which weren't rating, so why even bother? And then they realized the value of content, owning content as a library asset was tremendous in success. And it was hard to ignore that Seinfeld's first cycle of syndication was $280 million. So, numbers like that are staggering. And I think that it became now, and I think this is what Jim was alluding to when he was in Europe, we invented so much of what it is, right? And I think that they are now coming to us to help them to understand what it is that we sort of invented. And this is with all due respect to international film and the generations of beautiful movies that have been made. But when it comes to true 1 hour, half-hour programming, I think we really own it. And I think that we have an infrastructure and a business that has many people who can execute it. And they want to know what's that magic? What does it consist of? And I think that is the sort of a new trend that's happening, so that they can then create programming for their own territories, which, by the way, is often English language. Germany wants English language programming. They'll dub it. But it works because it's about, as Jim was saying, moire. If you're doing a real genre piece and it's a real tough cop show, sure, there's a tough French cop show out there and a tough German cop show, but the Americans have done cop shows forever and done them really well.
Yeah, but is there something to be said for, just staying on the topic of globalization for a little bit, that ultimately force-feeding or exporting, just kind of great shows, great dramas, whatever they may be, there's something about reinvention. It was recently announced 24 is being remade in India as a local production. They're going to make 24 as a local show for television out there. Years ago, we did a project where we turned Spider-Man from Peter Parker to Pavitra Prabhakar, bouncing off rickshaws and living in Mumbai. So it was something about, is there a way to give, a sense of,
Still a spider?
It's still Spider-Man, but, the fact is that how many kids living in a village in India could relate to a guy swinging off skyscrapers, but could maybe relate to a guy swinging outside the Taj Mahal, or swinging outside and dealing with local challenges that may be there? Is it the essence of the character remains the same, but the reinvention of it becomes more local? Do we lose something when we have these super Avengers, Avatar type of global tentpoles? Or is it really about trying to cater to that local audience? It's not an either or maybe, but American Idol does become Indian Idol or Chinese Idol and all of the things around the world, because people want to see their local heroes also rise to the top. and I'm just curious if would you guys, as creators of shows and people who are behind it, would you love to see Monk done as a remake in a foreign country, taking the essence and authenticity of it, or Dexter in the same way?
Are you kidding?
It's money.
Yeah, that's a payday.
Would it excite you, to kind of see?
Well,
those
I did a movie. I did a movie 10 years ago called for Paramount called Rat Race, which was like a medium-sized success here. And then I just got a call last month that it turned out there were some Chinese investors that loved that movie. Who knew? I got very just old luck, I guess. And now we're talking about a sequel to this movie, but it will be done with their money and done in China, and that's great. I don't know how else to get feature films done. I don't know how the feature world works anymore. It's changed so much since I was last in the trenches. But it seems to be, if you want to do a big budget studio movie, you got to go in now with one eye, or one eye on the international market. And,
many creators are very resistant to seeing their properties or their work really kind of fucked with, by others around the world. The question is, do you think
my show was shown around the world, and in many cases dubbed in, and I understand that it's kind of funny that in a lot of cultures, the actors that dub in the voices for hit shows become stars themselves in that country. The guy who did Columbo in Italy, I'm told, was a huge hit. It was a huge star in Italy just from dubbing in Peter Falk. Falk's voice. I guess he must have improvised occasionally or something. I don't know how you become a star, but it's interesting.
What do you think, Jim? What's your thoughts on
would
you like to see Sopranos done in kind of
yeah, sure,
a remake?
why not?
I
think
kind of,
I think that's great. It should be shown anywhere if they could do it. I think what I was thinking when you were talking was that the Avengers versus what's that movie about Maggie Thatcher?
Iron Lady.
Iron Lady, and I saw that on the plane. And you can't find two more different kind of movies, and it's getting harder to, I think, make those types of movies. The Iron Lady, and she was just brilliant in that movie, and it was a really interesting.
Actually, in the original cut of the Avengers, one of the Avengers was Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
And they cut her. They ended up at the last minute. They cut all her scenes.
And Ronald Reagan.
Yeah,
which,
Ronald Reagan,
I knew they used to have.
It was a different kind of movie.
But they didn't show that part in the movie.
Yeah.
But I think it's getting harder to make that kind of movie, which clearly I think. I wish I could write something like the Avengers. My ex-wives would love if I could write something like that. That's for sure. But it's just not in my what's the phrase they use these days? Wheelhouse. It's one of those Hollywood horrible phrases.
But does it say something is that what the audience wants? If
Well,
more of these films start bubbling to the top, is there?
But I can't write to what the audience wants, which is. I wish I could figure. I don't think anybody can, but it would be better if I could write the Avengers, but I just can't. And
Right.
I guess the audience wants more of the Avengers than the Iron Lady, right?
Well, look, it has to be good. The Avengers is a great romp. It's a really well-made picture. Joss did a great job. The characters are fun. It's great. It's great. If it's bad, the audience rejects it. Look, these are big bets. What, $250 million for the Avengers?
Easily, yeah.
These are huge bets, and they can cripple the studio. They can actually put people out of business. So it's really sort of bastardized the whole movie-making process at the studio level. And what's really suffered the most are those middle movies, those movies that cost $30 million down to 15, where you could really tell compelling stories and dramas that the business has been known for, that win awards, that actually move people. The independent film business, frankly, is actually flourishing. You can make a movie now for nothing. There's micro budgets.
They're filling the void. They're certainly filling the void. There's so many fewer studio movies being made. I guess.
The problem is distribution. The problem is somebody to bring that movie to the marketplace. And that's the other issue.
Do these big international hits, do they have to be good? Isn't there a formula that I know I can't wait to see the Avengers, and I hear it's great, and I know there are great movies out there, but
town is littered with bad big movies.
I know that have tanked in this domestically, but if there's I've been told that if you have. If you follow a certain formula and you have Sylvester Stallone, you have some international star on the poster that it's almost to say you're almost not gambling because of the international market is almost guaranteed to some extent.
Well, yeah, I mean, to that point, there's a quote here I'll read to you that from Andy Hendrickson, who was the CTO at Disney, and he recently said at a seminar, he said, "People say it's all about the story. When you're making tentpole films, that's bullshit. A tentpole film is one where you can see the desire to see the film to everyone in every distribution channel. It's the only kind of film you can spend $100 million marketing." And so, I mean, obviously, I'm sure he had to retract those statements after he said them. But
I think that's a bullshit statement, quite frankly. I mean, I think what I've seen in the studio world is that they all carry on about character. We want a character-driven, and it's bullshit. They don't give a rat's ass about character whatsoever. They just want to see a guy jump off a building and shoot somebody from behind their back or something. And you try to infuse it with some kind of real interesting characters, and they cut the shit out. And they ultimately are always talking about how they have character-driven this, character-driven that. And I think it's all about story. I think it's all about plot when it comes to big feature movies these days. Whereas I think in series, there's still some hope.
Yeah, but maybe that's a good distinction too. I mean, story versus character. I think that's a great
Huge.
distinction to understand, because I think even where this guy's coming from, it's probably more about the explosions than the CGI. He's thinking it's more about the world rather than the story. Can you create a franchise like Avengers? But John Carter was a big disaster, right? So I think you've got your graveyard full of counterpoints to this as well.
By the way, if I may, that statement is made by somebody who has sold the movie internationally before it's even been released.
Right.
They have got their numbers in place. They've made their McDonald's deal. They've made their Target deal. They know what their home video is going to render. And then you get to that tipping point where the cost of the film versus the recoupment dollars add into the marketing dollars, make it viable or not. So yeah, if he hits all those benchmarks, then any advertiser, any territory is going to say, yeah, I want a big movie, because that will generate box office, and that'll actually then flow as a halo effect into all the other films that exhibitor might be showing. Right. So it brings audience flow in. But it's when John Carter happens, and it's just unwatchable, that all of those numbers collapse, and studios get hurt really bad.
Did John Carter collapse across the globe? It just didn't work?
Oh,
it did? No, it didn't know.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I don't know if it did well internationally. I mean, maybe, comparably.
You can't have just foreign. Yeah. You have to have foreign coupled with domestic and an idea for recruitment of your P&A. And I don't mean to be so technical, but I think that is part of the challenges of storytelling if you're going to make big tentpole movies.
But Jim, to your point of story versus character, I mean, is there a balance? When you talk about is content an art or a science? I mean, you guys are as much scientists as you are artists in understanding, I think, where's that balance between story and character? Is it an art or a science? I mean, and what is the right formulas you like to use when you're... Is content an art or a science?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Is it,
I don't think it's. Look, I think it's art. Ultimately, I think it really is about finding a compelling character in which you want to invest your life in by writing it and hoping to see it live. I think the science. There's a certain mathematical science to putting together a series. Day in and day out. There are certain kind of rules that are almost mathematical as far as how an A, B, and C, D story work in any given 1 hour. But I think at the end of the day, you can't make it a science. I mean, I think you have to somehow see it in your head and see a character on the street and go, that would be interesting to write about. I could empathize with that character. And as a writer, have the ability to empathize with all your characters, in such a way that you really fully understand them, and which, again, the specificity of that will make other people who are watching it, hopefully, make them understand why these people are saying and doing what they're doing, which makes it interesting to me. But, I don't think there is look, when I think people try to do what you were saying earlier, where there's kind of a formula to it, I think there are some formulas. But at the end of the day, there are really 12 stories. And all of them, it's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. There are 12 variations of that. It's not, and there are certain kind of archetypal stories that impact all of us. It's kind of like, parental separation, right? I mean, which is what Disney made a fucking fortune off of. I mean, the first 10 minutes of any Disney movie, you've got the mother or the father separated from the kids. Every parent in the room is going, Christ, I want my kid back. And every kid in that audience is going, God, I want my mother or father back. That's archetypal. That's a brilliant thing. I mean, road movies work because you want to go home. Everybody wants to go home, you know? So there are certain things that impact us all. And there are certain, and I wouldn't call that formulaic. I would just call that visceral. I would call that, this is part of our DNA. Yeah. You know, there are about 3 or 4 more of those archetypal, iconic kind of emotional things that we all get. And I think if you could tap into that, great, you know? If that's a formula, then that's a formula.
Yeah, I mean, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, I mean, is there some truth to that? Is that
There's
really...
without question of a doubt. I mean, you know, we all look,
yeah.
you know, no matter where you go in this world, we all want the same things. We want to go home, we want to, you know, have dinner with our kids, we want to make love to our wives, we want to have a cocktail, go to bed, do it again, you know what I mean? It's not that complicated.
No, that you can't get away from that, and the 3-act structure. You can fight it with all your might.
Yeah.
You can't.
Still has to work.
Yeah, still has. I mean, that's how the machine runs. You know, I would say maybe there's a difference between TV and movies in that TV it really maybe more tilted toward characters that you want to see back in your living room every Monday night at 8. I mean, that, you know, it's all about identifying with those characters.
You know,
but he's the perfect example. I mean, you created a character that, how many people are as OCD as Monk?
Yeah, people
but yet
identified with
people
it.
loved him, right? I mean, because it was so specific, and you cared for the guy.
But then for 8-9 years, we worked hard at building these stories, you know, that we thought were fresh and original, you know, to keep the series fresh. You know, once you have the character, you've done half the job. You have to support this guy. I kind of used to tell my writing staff that we were Nelson Riddle, and Tony Shalhoub was Frank Sinatra, and you know our job was just to make him look good and to make these orchestrations look good. But no, we're never going to get the glory. No one, you know, he's going to get all the awards and all the glory, but. You know, our job is just as important.
But I think you said once, you told me once, Andy, that it's all for television is really all about casting. I mean, if you cast those,
casting is
casting is the key to the. In many ways, if you get the right guy for the right part, right? Yeah, then there's nothing.
But that goes for anything.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but that as writers, it must be very frustrating if you're creating great work and then, you know, ultimately.
It happens while we're sitting here. 3 shows have been miscast and probably going to suffer.
But you could blame the writer for that though too, because you know we are all, you know, like in Dexter, I was very proud. I mean, I got everybody I wanted in that cast. Fantastic. We all, as a showrunner and as a creator, you have a real say as to who's in that show representing your words. So, you know, like with Dexter, like I said, I was really very proud. I got everybody I really wanted. You know, if shows are miscast, then shame on the writer creator too. I mean, it's not just the executives who are pulling strings in that regard.
Right.
Do you know?
Right.
I mean, you would know. You can answer to that.
No. I would like to go back to storytelling though, just for a beat here, and give credit where credit is due with guys like these two. There's a subset there in the television business that has to do with the pilot process and the episodic series process. And the pilot process is a very specific style of writing, from the standpoint of putting in motion enough character development, enough scenic development to sustain a world for 5 years. The show can ultimately evolve, and that's a byproduct of the right casting or the wrong casting. It's a byproduct of social shifts that any really good show with integrity is in some way responsive to. But I do think that the idea of being a really good pilot writer is somebody that understands, for instance, in The Shield, when Vic Mackey shoots the cop at the last moment of that pilot, that changed the whole dynamic of that show.
That was a great
and put
pilot.
in motion 5 years of storytelling. Just that moment.
Wouldn't you guys agree that a really great pilot is one of the great joys of?
But it's uniquely
It's an awesome
different.
pilot.
But it's a uniquely different art form than the following episodes that follow it. It's an entirely different animal to write a pilot versus an episode, because a pilot, we've talked about this a lot, and you're really brilliant at finding these moments. But it's like we call it laying in the DNA. You know, and that could be just like a wink from one character to another character. And when you're watching the pilot, you go, "Oh my God, are they gonna sleep together in episode 2 or 3?" It's these tiny little things that you have to put in the pilot that all add up to give it the legs. So when an executive is watching it, they're going, "Okay, I could see where this is going for the next 5 years. I could see how they all have a life." But it's a very specific. It's like pitching. It's a very specific art form. You know, very few people can. You know, it's an interesting thing. I have I shouldn't say that. I know some people who are writers, but they're horribly not verbal. And they won't be able to sell stuff in Hollywood because they can't tell a story in a room. And that's a great irony, you know? I mean, they're great writers, but they cannot go into a room and engage those people that they're sitting opposite to convince them that they should be paid to write this story and that this is a story that everybody in the world wants to see because they can't say it. And that's an irony, being a writer, that you have to be really verbal, I think.
Well, pitching is a whole different.
Yeah, it's a real different art form. I mean, that in itself is nuts.
The bottom line is, if you can do anything else with your life at all, I would explore that seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Go home, find your high school sweetheart.
Yeah.
Don't go to Hollywood.
Air
man.
conditioning repair.
Avoid it at all costs.
If I could
It's true.
fix boilers, I think that's what I'd be doing. That's for sure.
No, it's absolutely. I'm constantly looking for blunt instruments that hit over my head, you know, because it's that town.
Because there's no security and there's no tenured position. You're living job to job. It's an exciting but stressful. You know, it's.
And plus, you're dealing with people who I would say, by and large, are not in Hollywood for the right reasons. Do you know? I mean, they don't.
Well, you're talking to I think 3 people here that have chosen not to live out there and for maybe different reasons, but you know, that's who your panel is. We're just a panel of outsiders.
I mean, to that point, a lot of the people I would imagine in this audience today come from the advertising world, the creative world of advertising, and pretty much in that 30-second, 60-second spots, they're trying to tell stories. They're trying to, you know, really kind of convey all of this drama and emotion. You know, would you give them any advice? Have you ever thought about the art of commercials or the art of trying to tell stories in that kind of a framework, and anything that they could glean some knowledge from as they're thinking about going back and trying to tell a story within such devices?
I think commercials these days are a perfect example of how our attention spans have been, you know, so short. You know, if you look back at commercials from the 40 years ago, with the commercials I grew up with, they were often one takes and a spokesman, you know, just talking in one long kind of monologue. And now that you're right, in 60 seconds you get what amounts to a whole arc. I mean, there's often a great, funny, heartfelt story being told, and I really admire that.
Yeah. So to that end, I want to open it up with questions from the audience. If there's any thoughts or comments.
If I may,
Yeah,
I just want to
of
add
course,
one
sure.
thing on the advertising.
Yeah.
I think Iconoclast is an interesting example on IFC of a show that integrates its advertising relationship with Grey Goose in a really seamless way, and I find it very provocative from the standpoint of it's a reality show, so we're not talking about traditional narrative. But it starts off with content. It leads in with a Grey Goose moment, and then it segues just very naturally into the content of the show. And then at the midpoint, it literally seamlessly goes into a piece that is almost artful unto itself about the celebration of the product. And then it segues right out without even you feeling like you're going away. So you almost have a seamless experience of true product integration. And I think integration versus placement is a very key shift for the advertising environment in content today, and you have to get in early. You can't go to one of these guys in episode 8 and say, I got a Pontiac. I need you to get this car, we're making so much money. They will freak out on you like you cannot believe.
Well, that's great. I would love to hear what you guys.
Unless they
think.
gave us a Pontiac to drive for free, I mean, then we would do it.
But I would say this: if you go to
happens.
to guys like
It
this at the
happens.
beginning, and you say, "Look, we have this opportunity for a character to drive a BMW. Can you own it creatively for the character?"
Right.
And then I think you have a different dialogue, and I think that is where we all have to sort of take care of each other and remember that it costs a lot of money to make content. So without necessarily compromising your integrity, how do you figure out a way to embrace those aspects of it and own it for yourself creatively?
I mean, what do you guys think of content integration? I mean, is it a complete bastardization of the creative art? Is it something you're open
People's
to?
radar,
Is it-
people's radar is out there, and I think people can smell. I think things that are shoehorned into
Placement.
placement, they can smell it now. So you do have to be very creative, but I know it's very important because DVRs are changing the landscape of TV, and everyone's zapping through commercials. I don't sit through commercials at all anymore. So I know. Actually, the last season of Monk, they came to us at Monk. I don't know if you had this, and they said they put a green screen in the kitchen, and I said, well, what product's going to go there? They say, well, we can decide later. It's a green screen, so they can drop products into the background of a scene later, or they can even they can change it, in South America, they can change that product that's in his cupboard. It's just, I mean, that's maybe the future, and that's in the
It's
middle
used
of
in-
the
It's
season.
used in sports all the time.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
That's right. It's
I mean,
behind
that
the
is- yeah.
behind the batter in every sports game, in every baseball game. They changed the ad.
And I wonder how much does that pull focus though from the scene?
It just
You know,
it would
I
drive
mean,
absolutely. And
and
we
that's
used
what
to fight.
concerns me. I
We
mean,
used to fight tooth and nail. We used to fight over the networks running little banners, promoting
Oh,
yeah,
the
yeah,
next
you
show,
can't
and
stop
we
that
would
shit.
fight all. And basically, as showrunners, you have to choose your battle, and you have to decide what you're going to go to the mat over and what you're going to give in on, and some of it is cannon fodder that you make a fuss about, but then you know you're going to lose that fight and fighting for another day. That's an art form too, is arguing with the networks.
But I would suggest that a character that's very hyperbolic and a little edgy because they drink six packs of Diet Coke a day, because you've integrated it into their character,
Right.
is a compelling
yeah,
act.
that you can get away with, right?
And then all of a sudden you've got
It
the
feels
feel
authentic.
where it feels authentic.
Ultimately, what you look for, if you've got to make it feel authentic. The other thing that strikes me when you guys are talking like this, though, is
The one thing, I'm so sorry to interrupt, the one thing that's going to drive me crazy, I was just reading, is the new James Bond, I understand, will not take his martini. Did you hear
He's going to
this?
drink a beer, I think, in
Because-
this new
I mean, that
movie.
is just, I'm
criminal.
going to,
Yeah.
my head's going to explode. Because
Why?
Because clearly somebody wrote a check for $30 million so he'd drink this beer.
Yeah, he's going to
Instead
turn
of
down
martini,
a martini
instead of
and drink a
shaken
beer
and
instead.
not
It's like
good.
when he left the Aston Martin, the
Yeah,
Jaguar,
yeah.
they paid for it.
Oh my God, I'm going to just be weeping in the fourth row.
Well, since you brought up Jack Bauer, I have to
Oh,
say,
I'm
though,
sorry,
is
I'm
there, James Bond, is the formula, is there an unconscious stratagem when people create the names Jack Bauer and Jason
yeah.
Bourne, which are JB, same type of names, and
Yeah.
become the ultimate other spies? I mean, do they play across, is there those types of strange, is that unconscious or
Well,
conscious,
I think
if you want to create
it's
it?
onomatopoeic. I mean, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
always like Snake Plissken. What was his name in Escape from New York? Snake Plissken? What was his name? Does anybody out there remember? Anyway,
don't know.
Kurt Russell.
Yeah,
he
yes,
had
yeah,
it's
yeah.
a great name. I mean, I think those are all monosyllabic, strong names. You know,
But is
I
it
think-
unconscious? Do people
Well,
in
the
the audience
JB
also...
may be unconscious.
The
I mean,
JB,
that I
yeah.
don't think anybody's sitting around going, "Ooh, I should come up with Joe Bob, Joe Bob or whatever." I don't know. But I think
I am.
those are strong
I'm sitting
names.
around
That's what
doing
you
that.
want,
No.
right?
But there's no doubt that you develop 24 understanding what it is that James Bond
That's right.
gives an audience.
Right, and I think with Jason Bourne, the same thing. I
Same
think
thing.
there's a formula these guys understand. Is it, would Jack Ryan have been better off as Jack Bryan, right? I mean, would there have been an incremental increase to push him to the top unconsciously? Who knows? But the only other thing before we open it up to questions is that you guys have also led such creative teams, and many of the people in this audience here are leading creative teams and every day trying to get to the best of managing creative groups, managing a writer's room, managing people to get the best product. I mean, is there any advice you'd give them of the best way to manage creative teams in your process?
Well, I always found that one guy in the room, at least one guy in the room, has to know, has to know what the show is and what works and what doesn't. The buck has to stop somewhere. I've been in rooms where nobody was quite sure what the show was, and you didn't get home for dinner that night. So if somebody in the room has the vision, or if the showrunner and the creator of the show is in the room, that's then you can give everybody a long leash, and at least one person will know, what the final product should be.
I think that's very true, but I think you must have that goal. You must have that. But I think what I find interesting is that you have to create an environment in which there are no secrets. I don't believe in the Hollywood kind of need-to-know basis, which always drives me nuts. I think if you can I'll take an idea from anybody and steal it. I could care less. I mean, on my shows, I'll hand a script to every Teamster and every, PA and say, read it, and I'll take anybody's idea. I learned that when I was directing plays. I think your worth is which ones you pick, but you want to make it so that everybody's kind of personalized and feel like they're part of the show. Because you will, as a creator, you're going to get all the glory. And those staff writers that are working for you, are getting a paycheck and they're working really hard. But you want to make them feel as if they are helping create a greater good. I think that's really important.
That's
I think
a
people
culture,
forget
right?
that.
A culture you
well,
gotta create in some ways,
to
right?
listen to anybody's idea.
Yeah,
Do you know?
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, questions? Anyone have any questions? What's that? Yeah, walk right on up and.
Oh, cool.
Just. Okay. How tough is it to end a show with the
I haven't
finale?
been in that situation, so I don't know. You,
Oh, I think he's referring to the Great Sopranos.
yeah, I had nothing to do with that. I have no idea. I mean, I thought
Yeah.
it was kind of
Yeah.
an odd ending. I'm not even sure I saw it. I might have seen a clip of it. But,
Right.
Oh, I love the Sopranos ending. But when we ended Monk, unlike a lot of shows, we had the luxury. We knew this was our last season, so we had that luxury. We got to think about it for months, at a time, and think about how we wanted to, the note we wanted to end the show on. So a lot of shows, of course, as you know, the plug is pulled pretty abruptly, and they don't get to do that. So we were very fortunate.
Jim, were you involved in the Shield ending? Or
Nope.
No. Yeah.
Nope.
I'm curious to your thoughts of. But
I will say this. It's
Yeah.
everyone warned me when my my show represented 9 years of my life, and everybody told me, other showrunners told me it would be very tough afterwards. It'd be like a divorce, and it was because I worked with the same writing staff for most of those years, and the same crew and the same cast, and saying goodbye to them, that was emotionally very, very tough. So
well, that I get.
yeah, I'll say that.
I would suggest that just to answer the question on the Shield, I wasn't associated with it directly at the end, but there was always the notion that Vic Mackey would have to pay for his crime in the pilot. And it was how he paid for that crime, which is what made it creative. And for him, it was being on a desk
Right.
with a computer screen.
Yeah.
And
But,
that was as bad as
Oh,
him
that's
being
cool.
killed.
I didn't know that. That's a
We
really
always talked about it.
great
but
way.
then when he gets up to go out at the end, you never know. What is he going to do? Is he going to give it all up? Yeah.
Yeah,
So now
that was a great finale.
That was a great
I'll also
finale
say this:
too, yeah.
when I wrote the pilot for Monk, Monk had this one unsolved crime in his life, the murder of his wife that he could never solve. And when I wrote the pilot, I just very quickly wrote it was a car bomb in a garage, and I didn't think twice about it, and I didn't think I'd ever have to solve that stupid murder. But then as we approached the end of the series, it began to dawn on us, holy shit, we have to, I didn't think at all. And I think a lot of shows, you can kind of smell it. A lot of shows, they've painted themselves. I think Lost famously was adding plot points and elements to the story that clearly they, were painting themselves into some
But
story corner.
there's a difference. I mean, Damon on Lost said that he had no idea where the show was going. I can assure you that Ryan Murphy and Sean Ryan and David Chase, I'd never worked with them, they knew where their show
Yeah.
was going.
Yeah.
They knew exactly
did.
what they were doing, Matt Weiner on Mad Men, as maddening as it can be for people at times, he knows what he's doing.
But so when the creator actually creates that pilot, is he thinking? I mean, when Dexter is being created, is there a thought one day this was where
Yeah.
it would end?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think you have to.
that's fantastic.
Oh, when I'm writing a pilot, maybe 5% is thinking way down the road. I'm just thinking, I have to get past, this junior executive and then that junior executive and then the focus group, and I just want to get this sucker.
What he's saying is
made.
very, very true. But I think if anybody, like if a studio executive asks you about,
Yeah.
your lead character, what's going to happen to him in the third year, it's like, that's just stupid. It's clearly, you don't know. You do know, I think, at the end of the day, where your lead character is going to ultimately end up. You don't know how he's going to end up that way.
That's it.
But, and the big what's the word I'm looking for? The misunderstanding of characters, like you'll get studio executives also say, well, your lead character, whether it be Tony Soprano or Vic Mackey or Dexter, how is he going to be different in the third year? And it's like, oh, for God's sakes. You know what? The character's the same after the end of the pilot as he is in the third year. He's not a different human being. What really matters is that he's gotten more things thrown at him. The stakes are higher. There are more circumstances that he has to deal with. But the character's the same. So whenever they talk about this character arc over 5 years, you're talking to an idiot. So, you really want to try to bow out and
I assume you're talking to an idiot until I hear otherwise. But
maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. But I mean, I think.
But don't you also feel, my answer would also be, an honest answer might be, in television, that by year 3, he will have morphed with the actor. Like the actor and the character.
And the character become one, yeah.
Will really become.
Well, we got time for just 2 questions, guys.
I'm so sorry.
Right here? Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to work with the team on Dexter actually on a transmedia project that showed the world based on the show and then let the audience kind of step in, got to go to crime scenes and become more involved with the characters. How do you guys feel about taking these narratives that have usually been so closely in your control and letting the fans play?
I don't have a problem with the fans playing. I do have a problem with a show creator not having a massive amount of input as to how that program or that application would be developed. I think it's, like I said very early on, I don't pretend to know all the different means of exploitation of this content is, but I would be loath not to be involved in that as to how the audience would respond to those characters that I created.
Well,
I'm not
yeah.
going to give it to you, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, this is a big area of transmedia where, I think you have all these moving parts. So you've got a big show up here in Lost or any of these shows, and then you've got something on the side that's being done for the web. And oftentimes the creators are never involved in those things.
Well, I think that's a mistake.
And that's a great question. I mean, is the weakest link destroy the entire franchise? Can one bad little experience out here that no one was really in control of really destroy the core? Or,
I don't know,
ultimately
ask
you can
her.
trust?
What was the success of that? I don't know anything about it, so.
Definitely. For us, we were actually working with the writers of Dexter.
Oh, okay.
We were also set constraints that wouldn't necessarily affect the narrative of the show. So it was a world based on Dexter that didn't involve the actual characters of the show because people were still afraid. People were still afraid to kind of merge the two. So it was more of an experiment. Actually, it turned out to be quite a successful one. But it's still a matter of changing the system and seeing, where you can play and where you want to withhold control. That was something we were also learning in the process, that we had to really define, the 75% that the audience gets to play in, and the 25% where we know where the story is to go.
Let's take one more question. Anyone? No questions? All right, guys.
Failed.
Yeah, right.
They're over there, right, with the glasses.
So it seems like the consensus is that elements of storytelling are essentially the same. The future is just going to be a different channel or a different screen or something along those lines. Is that true?
I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah, I
think
think it's.
how it's consumed is the X factor, but it still has to be a compelling story. It has to have great character, it has to have great dialogue, it has to be a world that you want to visit week in and week out. And then how you visit it is entirely up to you. That's what's exciting.
It's like sex. There are so many ways you can do it, but at the end of the day,
It's got to happen.
right?
Let's do it. There you go.
Nah, I don't know. I'm sorry.
End of show.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Is to you storytelling the same? Or it's,
Yeah, the
same
fundamentals, you cry if the audience is crying, you've done or laughing, or, intrigued, you've done your job, and as it's been said, it's been done for the same way and essentially for thousands of years.
Yeah, it's true.
We're all just sitting around the campfire, the caveman
Well, don't
stage,
forget,
still
television is so
yeah.
intimate.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
invite people into your home every night, you sit on your chair, lights in your home are either up or down, and then it's intimate. Movies are not.
Well, I want to thank all of you. This was such a fantastic experience, and hopefully you all enjoyed it as well.
Thank you, yeah.
Often not.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much.